Welcome back to Live, Laugh, Lies. It's your host, Susie, and today we have on the podcast Nancy Moscatiello, who is the executive producer for the Scamanda podcast and Scamanda documentary coming out on ABC and Hulu. So Nancy is a very interesting person. She's unlike any other guest we've had before. She worked on the Menendez brothers. She worked on O.J. Simpson, John Benet Ramsey, and Elizabeth Smart. Those are just a few of like the major ones that she was working on early in her career. So if that tells you anything about her background, it's that she is highly qualified to truly gather the information that is needed to create a case and to be able to put it out there in an entertaining way as she has done. If you haven't listened to the Scamanda podcast, if you need something to binge listen to, y'all got to get on it. The way I got hooked, you guys, I cannot even begin to tell you. This is such a juicy story. It's so wild. It's so bizarre. And I'm really excited because we had Nancy in studio to actually talk through the process of gathering information on Amanda Riley for 5 years before she was caught essentially in wire fraud for lying to everybody about having cancer. One of the most like lethal ways that you can lie, truly unimaginable. But as you guys know, if you listen to the podcast, I'm not unfamiliar with people in that territory. My ex-boyfriend lied to me about having cancer when I was just 19 years old, just a little baby. So yeah, really excited to have her on the podcast. I want to apologize in advance because we did run into some technical difficulties that I wasn't even aware of until afterwards. As you guys know, I evacuated for the fires and we haven't had someone in person in the studio since then. And I, in a panic, packed up my whole studio, brought everything with me in the car because I didn't know, God forbid, if my apartment was going to be here when I came back. So I evacuated, brought everything with me. So when I reset things up, I wasn't paying as close of attention as I should have. And there might be some audio difficulties at the end of the interview and one of the cameras as well. So we apologize in advance and we promise we will have these things ironed out for the next in-person guest. So hang in there. We hope you love it. It's really a juicy interview and thanks for listening.
Everyone just wants to live, laugh, love. But in this disappointing world, there are many who are faced with lies.
The annihilation of a family, pretending you have cancer, the constant ask for money, it goes to a whole nother level. You can't fault yourself for believing that someone's sick because why would someone do this?
Why would someone
lie about that?
I can't believe what she got away with.
She's still like to be. Wow.
This is Live, Laugh, Lies.
Nancy Moscatiello, thank you for joining us on Live, Laugh, Lies. Today, we're here to talk to you about the Scamanda podcast and the documentary coming out on ABC and Hulu. You were the investigator that essentially like discovered this case, investigated it thoroughly. You spent 5 years working on it. And I'm so excited to pick your brain. But before we get into the Amanda Riley of it all, I want to know a little bit more about you and what first drew you into, I guess, would it be true crime would be the category? Yeah. What drew you in?
True crime before it was, I think, true crime.
Right.
Because my first work was like an internships out of college was in local news in New York and then New York City. And then when I moved out here to Los Angeles, I started on a TV show back then called Hard Copy, which was considered tabloid or kind of what true crime is now. It's all crazy stories that you would hear that weren't making, you know, the headlines of mainstream media at the time. So there was several shows back then, Hard Copy, or Current Affair, and Inside Edition, which is still around, that we covered these very, very different stories or true crime.
Cool.
Yeah. The first case coming out was when I first started in the early 90s, I was put on the Menendez brothers case.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I was on what's called the news desk for them. And so I oversaw, you know, assignments coming in that was for like the trial dates, the trial itself, like working with the reporters and the producers, because I was new then. I wasn't a producer yet, gathering, researching, and getting everything together for the pieces that we would do on those cases.
I feel like I have 1,000 questions now about the Menendez brothers. I'm like, whoa, that's juicy.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. Okay, I'm curious. I have to ask, like, truly just curiosity. Do you feel like with the documentary that came out with them, do you feel like it portrayed things, or not documentary, the series that came out, do you feel like it portrayed things like accurately, or do you think it was?
To me, there's always a mix, right?
Yeah.
Of what, because no one really knows 100% for sure. We know they murdered their parents. We know they ran off afterwards. They did things you would think, oh, why would you do that? And you obviously did this. But I do think there was abuse, and I'm one of those that do believe that things went on in that household. I'm also one that doesn't think you should murder your parents over that.
Yeah.
So, but so there is that mix of what happened.
Totally. Oh my gosh, so interesting.
But I also think they've served a great deal of time, and they've been productive in prison.
Yeah.
If you go by the family, and I always think the victims' families are most important in how they feel and what they believe in all of this. And there's been such a strong support from their family, the aunts, the uncles, even the grandmother before she passed. Like that speaks a lot to me about, making sure that the victims' families are heard. And in this, it's unique that they are very supportive of it.
Yeah.
Of them getting out or hopefully getting paroled.
Wow. Okay. And around that same time, the O.J. Simpson case was going on. Did you also work on that one?
Yes.
Okay.
So I was the assignment editor for that.
Okay.
Which means you're directing the crews, the reporters, and gathering a lot of the information to ready it for what you're going to see on air. And so it was our first day of hiatus for a show for hard copy, which means everybody's off to go on vacation. And as the news desk, I was the only one on.
Oh.
And I got a call, a beep, on my beeper, because there wasn't, what you think of now, right? From my boss at the time. Her mom was out in the Brentwood area walking her dog, and she was a neighbor of O.J. Simpson's. And she called her daughter and said, they're putting crime tape up around O.J. Simpson's house, like the entrance. Something must be going on. And my boss called me and she said, can you make some calls to the local PD, see if there's anything? And we were one of the first ones up on the scene. We grabbed the cameraman that lived near me and we went out, and that's the type of stuff when you get out there first. Then we learned about Bundy very quickly from when I made those phone calls. And, our footage is walking in the steps, they had where Ron and Nicole were murdered.
Oh my gosh.
They had left this, they had not even cleaned it up, but they had removed the bodies and they had left and finished their investigation. And
you're the next people there?
We're the next ones in there with, it was crazy.
Oh my gosh.
But it's like that. It's, I don't do a ton of field work. I do mostly behind the scenes, getting everything ready for what people will see on TV. But those, I did so many cases in the 90s, and those are what kind of are popular now that they're coming back.
They are.
Yeah.
They are coming back.
Imagine starting your career amidst the media frenzy of America's most infamous cases. Iconic beginnings, wouldn't you say? We are lucky to have Nancy sitting here with us today to share her story.
Do you feel that you've ever, like being so close to this work, do you ever get scared, or do you take like extreme precautions in your life to protect yourself? Really?
No, I wouldn't say extreme. I mean, I've always, once I had children, I use my maiden name and my name, and I don't use my husband's name and my kids' names. I guess for a while I've done that.
Yeah.
Throughout, just to kind of keep a separate
That's good.
feel.
Yeah.
But now it's so much easier for people to find people. I think it would be very difficult. Back in the day, it was very easy to kind of keep it very separate and not out there. And really, until I did Scamanda, like I'm not on really social media. I'm not out there. So now it's a little more, you put my name and you see a lot more than before.
I feel like Scamanda is such an interesting story because obviously true crime was becoming popular around that time. Like, pop culture true crime, the podcasts were coming out and people were doing, it just was becoming like a thing. And her story was just so unique because it combined like so many elements of like new crime, which was like social media and the internet and all these like weird nuances that weren't there before.
It wasn't a murder. It wasn't it's a horrible crime. Don't get me wrong,
right.
But it's a different type of crime that I think it's difficult to tell for TV.
Yeah.
And it's difficult even for a podcast because you need all the elements to understand what somebody was able to pull off. Because otherwise it's just kind of words with no visuals to go along with it. So it was a tricky one to be able to bring to the forefront.
It was so interesting. I'm actually curious, like what drew you to that case, because it does feel although it was horrible, hearing some of the other ones, I saw that you did some stuff with John Benet Ramsey and Elizabeth Smart. Like you were doing these like really like intense like murder cases. And then this one is wild, but I'm like, it's
so different.
It's so different.
Yeah.
And you were on it for 5 years on the case. Is that normal?
No. Well, I mean, for like a big case, we'll research and keep with it. Like, you know, some of these cases, like OJ, they're doing stuff now, right? That documentary just came out from the side of Nicole's family. And that's something like, I mean, I worked on that in the mid 90s, right? And so here we are again revisiting it. So yeah, some stories you'll be involved in or you'll know and rework and rework.
Yeah.
I don't normally see a case, find a case, work it. That's more of an investigative reporter.
Okay.
I've always worked in television. So everything I'm doing, I'm gathering the stuff to be able to tell the story on air, right? To have the visuals and have my field producer or my talent go out and bring that story back.
Okay.
And so for many years, I've overseen newsrooms where I have a team. You know, I'm a team of like 8 other producers, where we're working on hundreds of stories over the course of a season, let's say, and we're picking the best ones and figuring out all the twists and turns in them and getting to the families or the law enforcement. We work really closely with law enforcement, with prosecutors and defense attorneys to kind of round out a story.
Okay.
And so that's usually what I do. So with this one, the goal was to tell this story. Someone had contacted me about it. They saw we were, for the show that I was working on at the time, we were looking for scam stories, or we were looking, because they're hard. They're hard.
Yeah.
They you know, you have to be right.
Yeah.
And so it's not an easy thing you can't just put it up and say this person's doesn't have cancer without having the facts, you know, and having everything nailed down. And, you know, really solid newspaper reporters. And that's what they do. It's a little different for me for the type of shows I work on. We don't normally break the story so much, but I was out looking for different types of scams because we were like, oh, we need to mix it up. We want to get different stories to tell. And so when I posted on a Facebook group saying, you know, here's who I am, here's the show that we're going to be launching, and we're looking for a variety of different stories. And that a cancer scammer was something we really wanted to try and find. And someone reached out to me.
Do you, I guess in the podcast, it was kind of delivered as an anonymous tip. Do you know who it was? Like, do you?
Yes.
Okay. Is that public knowledge? Can people know?
Not yet.
Okay.
But the documentary.
Okay. Tune in, you guys. Okay. That's exciting. I'm really excited to know who it is. I have like a theory, and I won't say it because if it's right, I don't want to spoil it, but I have a theory that it's somebody that was referenced in the podcast. And I'm curious if it was that person that kind of saw these signs all along.
I know people have asked a lot, and you know, I left that up to them. To eventually, if they ever wanted to talk about it more.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a lot of questions like, I had to be someone, you know, a doctor, a nurse, or this, about, you know, like the church. You know, and so, you know, I think it's going to be interesting for people to finally feel and to know why they did what they did and you know, all of that.
Right.
So.
For anyone that hasn't heard the podcast, a little bit of background, Amanda kind of got plugged in with this family, started dating this guy, married this guy that had a daughter who suffered from cancer in her childhood, correct?
Right, a stepdaughter.
A stepdaughter, yeah. So they had a stepdaughter.
And then
he had a
in
kid.
that marriage, he also then had a baby with his wife.
Amanda.
It's the wife before Amanda.
Okay, right. Okay. I'm really curious to hear what the daughter who had cancer, like how she feels about everything now. Do you know, like, is she close with her father?
The child at the time that had cancer would be Corey's stepdaughter at the time. And will be in the documentary. She was in the podcast a bit.
Okay. It just seems so unreal that somebody could take a story like that and create your own like fake twist to it and scam people for money.
With Amanda, I do think her tendency started well before meeting that family, meaning like needing attention.
Interesting.
Creating situations in her mind about illness. And we would talk to a lot of different people that in different stages of her life that, you know, lying was a thing.
Interesting.
Like for no reason to lie, but that need and to draw this attention out. And then maybe at the time, some of them knew that she was lying about certain things and some weren't aware because they were small lies, like that type of thing. And then, you fast forward to being in that family, this young girl has cancer, that attention was there. Amanda was brought in to help hang out with that little girl, like, doing cheerleading and things because that little girl couldn't go out in public with her illness. So I think, I do think there's a component that was built upon. She saw that attention and she saw, that she had that need for that. But she took it way beyond
a little attention. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this stems from some kind of like mental illness?
When you look at it, it has the signs of that.
Yeah.
But there's a difference to me, that, you can have some tendencies for attention and all of that. And yes, I know that's a disorder and those things exist. The annihilation of a family,
right?
Pretending you have cancer, money coming in, the constant ask for money, it goes to a whole nother level.
Right.
For my, for me, it's like, that's not okay.
Right.
Yeah. And does she need help? Does she need therapy, counseling? I'm sure a lot of that would help.
It must have been difficult to investigate a story against the belief of so many people knowing the heavy implications. Nancy, I don't know how you did it. And for 5 years, job-hopping millennials these days could never.
How far into investigating this case did you feel like you really had a good story? Or were you back and forth kind of teetering throughout, like maybe she does have cancer, maybe she doesn't?
By the time I got involved, there was 3 years worth of blogs already, right? So I'm reading like a diary basically, and I'm fact checking everything in there. So that first month of like really digging deep, looking into anything I could, trying to make phone calls, trying to figure out what's true and what's not for those 3 years. That first month, by the end of that first month, I was pretty solid in my thing. And plus I'm also working off some information that I'm giving, of course, from the tip.
Okay.
They had some information for me that I'm now looking at it through different lenses, right? If you're looking at her stuff as is online, there's no reason to doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
Having information that I was like, oh, okay, well, yeah, then this doesn't make sense, right? Or this is worth checking out.
Yeah.
And then by the end of the first month, I also reached out to Alita, which was the first wife, and was able to fact check a lot of things that wasn't true.
Did Alita believe that something was up, or did she just think, oh really? Because and it was interesting, like hearing on the podcast, it felt like she was just devastated. I mean, it's horrible what they did to her as well.
Yeah, no, when I contacted her, I mean, she straight up said, I have really nothing to say about them. They've made my life a living hell, but she's dying with cancer and
what can I do?
I feel awful. And so she was very gracious with them.
Wow.
And as much as they were ripping things apart in her life, and at that point when I first reached out to her, she had already lost custody of Jessa through
lies.
That she knew they were lies, but the courts didn't believe her,
right?
And so when I told her about why I was calling and here's what I'm working on, like she couldn't believe it. Like she just said, oh my God. And then I think with that, then you start looking back, and now you're looking through, she starts looking through it through a different lens. And she starts realizing, oh, wait a minute. They submitted paperwork in her custody case. They submitted medical bills to show his hardship. And when we went back and looked at them, we found they were Photoshopped. Like there's things that they didn't notice. Why would they? Like they're not looking for that.
Right.
Then it just became more and more apparent that this is more than just faking cancer. This is scamming the whole
fraud.
Yeah. The whole custody situation.
Because at one point they were fighting for him to pay less in child support, correct? Which he did. Okay.
I have a binder. She ended up, by the end of the few years that I was looking into it and stuff, she subpoenaed all his true pay stubs, 8 years worth. And it's tens of thousands of dollars that she lost out on.
Oh my gosh. Is there back pay for that kind of thing?
Yeah. The courts, when she went and she said, look, here. And they were like, well, you need to get an accountant, and it's been too many years. And, they put it all back on her.
Oh
There's really,
gosh.
So, and by then, like Amanda was arrested, like all things had moved forward enough that she was like, I'm done. Like she's getting what she deserves in her mind. But yeah, it's alarming.
That's like devastating. And even as a listener, I obviously don't know these people, but you just want justice served. And that feels like such an injustice.
Yeah, it is. And she was paying them, paying her husband child support at one point.
Wow.
Because they had custody. So it's more than when someone, says, well, there must be mental health issues.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. But
also she's a scammer.
But also, mental health issues doesn't make you Photoshop 8 years of pay stubs with your husband.
Right.
So
they took it to another level. And
yeah.
Oh gosh. I mean,
that's devastating consequences for a child. Yeah.
Truly. I mean, I can't imagine what all those kids are experiencing right now. And it sounds like from the podcast, the father kind of got off on nothing. He was supposedly uninvolved, didn't know. I personally, this is an opinion, it's not fact for those of you listening, but it's like, I just personally feel like there's no way he couldn't have known what was going on with the finances. There's no way he couldn't have been involved in this scam at the level that it was. I just don't believe that he's innocent. And I know maybe that's not a fair take, but I could
tell you this. I had to go to court with them from the restraining order. Corey testified. And Corey testified to going to all her treatments. So
he lied there.
So I don't know how you do that when your wife didn't have cancer.
Yeah.
But he did. He said he went for 5 years. He's been going for treatments, and he goes. And many, many times they would post on her blog and post on social media of him with her supposedly at chemotherapy treatments.
That is so strange.
We also know from the podcast that they had told that couple a couple of years prior that she was dying of cancer before she was even diagnosed.
Right.
Right. So, there's a lot there that says, well, how did all that come to be if you did not know?
You mentioned the restraining order. Can we get into that?
Sure.
How did you get caught up in a restraining order from Amanda? How did that come about?
I think she was running scared at that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked on it for 5 years. It wasn't that I was, constantly calling for 5 years straight. That's not what I do.
Yeah.
I mean, at some point I knew the investigation was going on with federal authorities. I had handed whatever I could over to the state authorities. That was Detective Martinez, because that was my first point of contact. And then with Arlette Lee, Special Agent Lee, who was the IRS agent. So I knew they were doing their thing, and I was not privy to what was going on behind the scenes. I think people have to understand that they held a grand jury. So the people that I passed along to them, the people that I had made contact with, were called into a grand jury before she was arrested. And then she found out about the grand jury because they also brought in friends of hers that donated money, right? Because now they're seeing who's donated what, and they need to talk to these people. And these people don't have any idea she's faking cancer at this point. So she finds out about that. And, that was a problem for her because now it's getting real.
Yeah.
Right? And she always told everyone that the ex-wife had hired me, or the ex-wife and a friend of hers was pretending to be a producer and pretending to be an investigator. So she was putting out these lies all along to kind of explain who I was.
Okay.
And then it got to a point where she became principal at a little Christian elementary school. And that is the next time that I picked up a phone, because I was so appalled by that. Because, these are innocent children in a community that has no idea what's really going on behind the scenes. And she started taking money right away from a woman that was dying. That was another staff member, a staff member that had cancer. So I reached out and just, look, I'm looking to learn more about your new principal, that type of thing. And she knew right away, I think, behind the scenes, like, they know where I'm at. They know what, and so then that's when she's filed a restraining order. So I think it was just things were closing in on her, and I was the issue now. Not what she was doing was the issue, but I became the issue, and the ex-wife. So she had that dynamic. And so I think that was a desperate attempt to stop me, to be able to say, you shouldn't be allowed to look into me, and I need a restraining order because you're causing problems.
Had you interacted with her face to face at that point?
No.
Wow. So you'd never
I'd put in
met
calls.
her.
I put in 2 calls. I talked to an attorney for her twice, I think.
Okay.
So she knew of me. She knew of me about 4 months in, 3-4 months in.
Into the investigation or your investigation.
Yeah, because I had started calling people to talk to them to say, here's who I am.
Yeah.
I'm working on this story. This is and they all told her because they just said, you are I'm a horrible person. Like, how could you even say that? You don't know what you're talking about. Okay. Sorry. That's okay. You don't have to. And so she got wind, and then Alita started putting it in her court documents because she wanted relief. She wanted something figured out, and she thought the courts could help. So her and her attorney brought it up in their court filings.
Wow.
To say, hey, there's an investigation, a local one at first, and then a federal one.
Mm-hmm.
And it fell on deaf ears, which is crazy to me. But
crazy. And as they were going through the federal, the local and then federal investigation, were they still scamming people for money? Were they still taking money?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Because it all happens behind the scenes. I know. It's crazy. I mean, so
oh my gosh.
It was 2015. So by October, November of 2015, Detective Martinez was involved because I had called because my source had said to me, I called the police, I called the district attorney, like I called places to tell them this is what's going on.
Yeah.
And she said, so I think they're investigating behind the scenes. And so I was like, oh, well, let me see is there an open case? Is there something going on the local level?
Right.
And that's why I started reaching out to the fraud department, which was Detective Martinez. He had no idea. He's like, what are you, I know nothing about this. Like, no one's come to us. So I said, oh, well, maybe you should know. And then so we started this dialogue. I said, let me send you everything I've researched. Let me show you what this is, because I think this is what's going on. So then once that started, so that was by September, October 2015.
Okay.
And then I spoke with the federal agents in February of 2016.
Okay.
And then they raided her house September 2016. So she knew, you know what I mean?
Oh my gosh.
And she kept going.
Yeah.
Like, you would think federal agents would show up at your house and raid your house. She posted that night and continued to take money after that.
I would be so scared. I would be so scared if I were her. If people were knocking on my door, I would shut down shop immediately and be like, we're stopping.
She would take the blog down and only post on social media a little bit, like on Instagram.
Gosh.
But then she would put it back up. And it was like, because she had to go into remission fast.
Yeah.
Because like she had been weaving this yarn about, so close to death, and then money comes in and I get my drug. And now so she was in the midst of this. So to shut it down would be super suspicious to everyone that believes her, right?
Interesting. This is just so wild. She would say she's like literally on the brink of death, incurable, gonna die, miracle baby coming.
Yes.
And then she gave birth to 2 kids, right?
Yeah.
Like throughout the course of being terminally ill.
And she talked about, the second, he's even late, healthy, happy, everything's great.
Right.
Yeah, we're all great. It's a miracle.
It's so wild. Did the restraining order affect you or your family or your mental health? Or was it like, oh, like, here we go?
No, it affected things for me work-wise.
Oh, really?
I was served while I was employed and running a newsroom. And so, no boss wants that.
Right.
But wants that. And it was, they supplied the lawyers and they helped defend.
Amazing.
And it was expensive because when, I never felt like physically they were going to harm me or come after me or anything like that. They were in Northern California and I'm, down in Los Angeles. But, just she would delay it so much. So, you would get the date set, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd have to fly up to San Francisco. They'd have to prep me. And it was 2 or 3 days of getting ready for that, to go to court for her to cancel and tell the courts that she's in the hospital. She would go check herself into the emergency room. It would get canceled. You get back on the calendar. So this went on for 6 months.
Wow.
And then she agreed to a whole bunch of things. And then at the last minute, she refused to turn over what she was supposed to in the agreement.
Right.
Because if she could prove she had cancer at that point, I would have went away.
Okay.
She could have won a lawsuit. Like lots of things would have went in her favor.
Right. But she couldn't prove it. Okay. I have to wonder, with all of the court appearances, lawyer fees, everything that she's had to do between dealing with this and the custody battles, I feel like half the money at least had to have gone to just getting a lawyer.
No, she didn't pay anything because she had a public defender for the case, for the federal
case?
Stuff. Mm-hmm. I think she had an attorney, a private one, for a brief time because I had spoken to him once or twice.
Okay.
The one that handled my case, because they have to submit money you spent because we won the right to attorney fees, which the company I worked for said, no, that's fine. Like because there would be no way it was.
Oh, like she wouldn't be able to pay it.
And so she submitted her thing, and I think she spent like $1,500 or $2.
Okay, so she didn't spend a lot of money.
No, because she didn't need to prep or come or do anything.
Because she was like, nothing's going to happen because I don't have cancer. Yeah.
You can cause a lot of chaos sometimes.
Yeah.
For people. And then that's what was stressful, right? Because I've got my company looking at me like, okay, well, we're going to fly up again. We have to do this. And like, I feel terrible because, if they knew I was correct in my research and what I did, but still, if this went south, that's not good for them or me or, and it was a First Amendment issue, which is I don't even think she realized that that's what she created because I worked for news,
Yeah.
So it had a lot of implications that I don't think she even realized at the time.
Yeah. And it's very nuanced. Had you ever been so intertwined with a case before?
No.
Yeah. This feels very personal.
Yeah. No, it turned personal. It wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah, of course.
It wasn't the plan. And I never would want that to be.
Yeah.
I've been entwined in stories because I keep in touch with many, many families of victims that I've worked with over the years, or when I tell their stories, like you get very involved with a family.
Yeah.
Dealing with this was just, it's because then I'm looking at, okay, so that show wraps up and I'm out there and it's still not a done deal, the story, because she's not arrested yet. But I had wrapped that show after 3 years.
No way.
Yeah.
So it was like an unsolved
It was just,
case?
I couldn't.
You couldn't air it?
Well, I prepped for a lot of it in doing stuff, but couldn't do anything because, we needed hopefully for her to be charged.
It's honestly amazing that Scamanda came around with the podcast because you'd done all this prep work and it's like,
well, yeah, that's kind of how it happened. When she finally did get arrested, a friend of mine was in development for Lionsgate. And so he said, he's like, here, okay. He had worked with me prior on knew all about Scamanda. He was my executive on the show I was on at the time.
Okay.
So he's like, let's do this. Let's try and get it out there as a documentary and whatever. And that was an interesting background too, because he had talked to networks and different people about it at that time, which was early on. And they were like, we've never heard of this story. He's like, yeah, no one has it. We have everything. We have all the documentation.
Amazing.
They're like, whoa, but we really want a story people know. And like, so nobody was really interested.
Oh my gosh.
At all.
No way.
Yeah. There was kind of like, well, we don't know it. There's no, and so, and he had said, well, let's do a podcast. Are you up for doing a podcast? I was like, yeah, pair me with someone. Because I don't write. That's not what I do. But I said, I'll bring all the people, all the stuff. And then that's when Charlie Webster got involved in Lionsgate. And she did a great job writing it and figuring it out. Like how to you're taking a story with that really is heavy on pictures or on things and not being able to use those things. So it was, the victims and their stories, it was so compelling that I think that's what just drove people in, because it was people from all walks of life and all different parts of her life that she scammed, which was, and people, it's hard to wrap your head around somebody. So when we were all and done, it was 10 years that she faked cancer because she started in 2012.
According to like court documents, they were able to pin her for like 120,000.
Yeah, just under.
Do you think there was a significant amount more that was not documented? And if so, like, do you think double or like triple or less?
Easily triple.
Triple.
Yeah, no, because I documented a lot of it. Because a lot of it was, she would post, right? She would say, oh my God, this such and such family raised $5,500, but they're not in the
fund
because they didn't give through the wires.
Okay.
So anyone that gave cash, anyone that gave checks, gave just in person, however, they gave gift cards, they gave a free babysitting, free gymnastics. Like there was all kinds of stuff given that has nothing to do with the money that went through the wires.
Okay.
I mean, I've been in touch with family members, like family members gave money and that was not part of it at all.
Wow. Because there's a part of me that in hearing everything and when it got to the end of the podcast and it's like $120,000 and I'm like,
it doesn't seem like a lot, right?
I'm like, for faking cancer for 10 years, I'm like, you couldn't pay me $1 million to do that. Yeah. Like this woman shaved her head. She was going like faking fainting, literally peed on the floor of her church to pretend like she fell over, fainted, got taken away in an ambulance, like literally putting on the show of a lifetime. And then taking pictures in the hospital and taking materials home. It must have been a full-time job for her.
100%.
And I'm like, why not just get a real job? You know what I mean? I'm like, and even if it was quadruple that amount, even if it was $500,000, let's say, $500,000 over 10 years, about $50,000 a year, she probably could have, based on her work and her supposed personality, everyone seemed to love her. She was bubbly. I'm like, you could have gotten a job for $50,000 a year.
She would have jobs.
And she would have jobs, yeah.
You know, so that's what this was. And I think that's the mental illness component, right? That kicks in at some point. It snowballs. The money's coming in, and she just kept asking for it. Right. Everything was, she could have said, oh my God, I'm on a trial and I need this drug. And then, oh, now I'm better. Now I'm worse. And never ask for money. Yeah. But that's not what she did.
She scammed.
She constantly asked. If she didn't get $12,000 by this date, she wouldn't get the drug. So that's a different dynamic.
Right. Oh gosh, that's really manipulative. Mm-hmm. That's really wild. Okay, so the takedown, ultimately, it's not a crime to lie to people. You know, she can't be in trouble for telling people she has cancer. Like, what can you do?
Right.
She's lying. Is it illegal to collect money on the premise of a lie? Is that illegal?
Well, yeah. So the way Agent Lee, the wire fraud, so the way Agent Lee explained it to me, and she explained, I think, on the podcast, when she had to go out and talk to all these people that had given money, right? She's contacting them. She said, you know, the way she would approach it, she would say, if Amanda didn't have cancer, would you have given her this $10,000, right? Or this $5 or whatever the amount is? And the majority of them said, well, no. I mean, I gave it because she had cancer and there was a need, right? She needed it for this medication. So that was the premise of the fraud, right? They are giving the money because she has cancer and needs that money for her drugs and whatever. And she's spending the money on the cancer. Right. So that was the fraudulent part. And then the means was over the wires, which is wire fraud. I know it's a broad terminology, wire fraud. So, and that's why it was so unique for them to be able to bring charges, because that's not, we think wire fraud, there's embezzling and white collar crime. Is it just different? We always assume we said, and we think IRS, we think taxes, not this.
I was going to say, she claimed to lots of people that were coming to her, and she was like, well, I didn't know I had to pay taxes on the donations. And that was like her big
That was
claim.
her out. When
that was
she,
her out.
To explain the federal agents. To,
like, why are you being investigated?
Well, and people hate the IRS, right? So you could, right?
Yeah, everyone comparing.
Like, oh, God.
Screw them. Yeah, exactly.
I can't believe they're coming after someone with cancer.
And I'm curious, was there truth in that at all? Did she not pay taxes, and did she get like double
fine?
Double
that had nothing to do with it. No, she got the charges. She had a bankruptcy charges.
Okay,
so that's what they pled away.
Yes. Okay.
For the ultimate plea of guilt, because she pled not guilty.
Okay.
And then so they had charged her with bankruptcy fraud and then the wire fraud.
Okay, because basically for the bankruptcy fraud, they forged documents to make it look like they.
So there was twofold. The money coming in was never disclosed, right? And they were making their payments for their bankruptcy or however that worked.
Okay.
So and then in the bankruptcy papers, she claimed that she was getting or she had money coming. She had put a claim in, I believe, for disability, and never got it. But in that paperwork, she disclosed that she put that in. So that's also lying, you know, because she was basing everything on cancer. They use that, meaning Corey and Amanda, in all their paperwork. So while they're in court, and we had a recording for the podcast where there's one hearing when you're in federal bankruptcy court that's actually recorded, and so we got a hold of that.
Oh, wow!
And she's standing there, and he's standing there, and she's saying, "Oh, well, I have my chemotherapy on this day, and I have him getting a bone marrow transplant on this day." So trying to prolong the bankruptcy stuff, and then he's saying, "Oh yeah, let me call my wife," because another hearing, we have a couple of them where, you know, she's like, "Oh honey, when is he's on the phone with her in court. Oh yes, she's scheduled for another bone marrow." Like, so all this is going on in court.
Never ended.
So they used it to kind of dance around a lot of stuff for many years.
Wow. Okay, so something you said on the podcast, I believe it was you said, it was infuriating to see a perfectly healthy person take the plight of true warriors of cancer for financial gain and attention.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that your sister passed away from lung cancer, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Did that influence your approach and determination in this investigation?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, yeah. Once I like latched onto this, yeah. I mean, that was a big part of just in me. Like, you know, I could only do so much. My sister was young with 2 small children, so there was a lot of correlation of her claiming to live that life that I, you know, went through with my sister. So like, yeah, 100%. It was like, you know, how dare you? Is it how I felt? And so it really, you know, kept me wanting to you know, motivated to see this through.
Right.
If not just for, you know, for my sister's sake. I mean, I have family and cousins. My father too passed from, so many people I knew passed from cancer. And it's just like, I think that was just all inside of me. Like, you know, this is wrong and it's disgusting. You know, like there was a lot of things that I thought, if I could, this one small thing makes me feel good about trying to
right,
you know, do something about it.
That makes sense. And at least for me, 5 years, which is what Amanda was sentenced, correct? It was 5 years. That doesn't feel enough. And I know maybe that sounds harsh, but like, I feel like what she did is so horrible. And honestly, probably the trauma she's caused to the children in their life. I'm just like, 5 years doesn't feel like enough. But I do think the work that you're doing, and the podcast, and now the show is it a series? Is it a docuseries?
It'll be, for 1 hour.
Okay. So the series that's coming out, I do think when you put yourself in her shoes as somebody that needs attention and constant validation and people to feel sorry for her, this feels kind of like the ultimate punishment, the ultimate justice. You know, her truth is out there and it's like a very dark truth. It's very disturbing and sad, but it's like, okay, you won't be getting sympathy from anybody, which is really what it sounds like she just wanted this whole time, is sympathy and money.
Yeah. I mean, you know, in talking with Alita when we did the podcast, because, you know, working this for so long, Alita's like, oh, I'm going to be so nervous to ever talk about this, because she's very private. Like, she doesn't really, she's not on social media. So that's not something this woman does.
Wow.
Because I think going through such trauma, like losing custody for a brief time and fighting to get her back and finally getting her back, and then having all this swirling around, it was, you know, it's a lot. You think like, I just wanted to live my life and move on. So it took a lot for all the different people to want to talk, because it's kind of embarrassing. You know, people that gave so much money, they say, how was I'm so stupid? It's like, you're not stupid. Like, she's that good, right? It's not that it was the crime of a century, but you can't fault yourself for believing that someone's sick, because why would someone do this?
Why would someone
lie about that? And so, you know, there's a lot of self-reflection on people really struggling with it. And so, you know, Alita was like, I'll do this. She, you know, for her and for Jess, it's like, I want this documented. I want it out there. I want people to know what she did so that it doesn't happen to them. And, you know, that was the idea, to do the podcast, and then in hopes of maybe doing something for TVs at one point. And we just never imagined, like the podcast went crazy.
It's awesome.
Which was great. So I kind of, at that point, I was like, job done. You know, someone Googles her, they're going to know.
Absolutely. I actually am curious, like, what she will do when she comes out of prison. Because how long is she there? How long has she been out? Oh, no way.
She just got, so the way the federal system changed a little bit in the last handful of years. So she's able to earn credits and earn things. So she, her out date is December of 2025 now. So she shaved about almost a year off.
Oh my gosh. Did she participate in the documentary at all?
No, not. We're in touch with her throughout. Charlie is. So there's some information and there's some stuff, but yeah. And then we have a lot of unearthed footage and things, found new stuff.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I know today you brought just like binders full of documentation with you, which I think is so interesting. So I know obviously the Scamanda podcast, there wasn't visuals, but what are some of the things that you feel like really paint the picture that people maybe didn't get while listening, even though you guys did such a good job? It was
it's hard, right? Because you can't, it's still, people always ask me, but how did she do it? And I'm like, I said, she literally went to emergency rooms and said, oh, I fainted. I'm nauseous. I have cancer. I have Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'm sick. I've been vomiting. I fainted. Whatever it is.
Yeah.
You go into an emergency room. They see you. They say, okay, oh my God, whatever you want to tell them.
Yeah.
Okay, we can't find anything, but okay, here's something for nausea. Here's something like so. And then she would take pictures, and she was very good at it. I mean, she got herself admitted. I mean, it wasn't like she didn't go into the hospital. So she would get, in there for up 4 or 5 days, or, maybe sometimes longer. It just depends.
What?
I know.
Oh
I
my
know.
gosh, 4 or 5 days?
Yeah.
I feel like they keep you out of there so quick.
She's a risk for falling. So, because there's pictures of her with the yellow Band-Aid, the bracelet that says, fall risk. So she would fall on the floor when nobody was looking. Like there's a lot of things.
Oh,
if you
my
want
gosh.
to bad enough, you could do. And it's horrible, but
wow.
It happens. I mean, even after she was indicted, they moved to Texas. The story came out about her being indicted. I did like a small, like a written up type of thing to kind of get it out there.
Yeah.
I immediately when she moved to Texas, I got contacted by someone there. She had been in and out of those hospitals already claiming to have cancer. And they actually red flagged her. They thought she was like shopping for medications.
Oh, like painkillers or something.
Yeah. And then the articles came up and they were like, wow.
Do you think that this case will set a precedent for other scammers? Like when this comes out, I mean, obviously Scamanda, the podcast, took off and was like very well known. And I feel like even before listening to it, I kind of knew about the story, but I wasn't, after listening to it, your mind is just blown. Like I can't believe what she got away with.
Mm-hmm.
But do you think this is going to create like fear for people who might consider doing this?
I hope so. Yeah, I think, yes. I mean, I would think that some people may think twice, but I'm getting contacted by so many people suspicious of people they know now. After listening to the podcast, I go, this seems
fishy.
Yeah. Amanda wasn't vague with stuff, right? Amanda was, those blogs were super, super detailed. And I still look back at those when I read through them. I'm like, why didn't anybody really look at this? It's a very dear friend of theirs that's going to be in the documentary that is an emergency room nurse. Was really close friends with them and blew his mind because that's not what he saw. Like, he knew you're coming in and you're telling people you have cancer, or you're seeing like, oh, that makes sense. She's not feeling well, so she's coming in. You know? But it's not like you're not seeing their oncology charts and all that stuff, right? You wouldn't. So it's people like that, just like, how did I miss this? Like, wow, like I'm around them. I'm with them all the time. Right. So those are new people that talk about that experience too.
Okay. Interesting.
From what I'm told from Special Agent Lee, she's getting contacted through other federal agencies, investigators that are like, okay, we've been contacted about someone locally since this podcast came out. Can you help us? Like, how did you go about this? So she's been helping, instrumental with some other cases, I guess, that are being worked.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah, I
that's
think
cool
so.
that they're looking to your work.
Yeah, and it should be. Like, this should be something that, I know it at first, when you first hear it, you're like, it's 100,000. It's really the principle of what she did.
Totally.
It becomes a different type of case. It's one that you want on the books, you want there, so that if others do it, there's a precedent to say, oh, wait, this judge up sentenced her, right? Because the government was asking for 18 months. And the judge was so appalled by everything. After all the impact statements and hearing from all the different people, she said, if I did this and gave you 18 months, you would be right back at it. Like, this would unfaze you.
Do you think she will come out and try it again? Do something else maybe?
She knows what she did, right? The way she expresses it, and even while she's in prison, the paperwork she was filing to get an early release and stuff, it is just 24 visits to the emergency room with all kinds of medical claims. And then doctors saying, we caught her playing with the wires and adjusting this and holding her breath for this test. And so,
Hi. So yeah, she's not at it.
Yeah. So I think she needs some help, obviously. And I hope she gets that. She should.
Yeah.
But I still don't think, because I still hear from other folks that have been in contact on and off with her, she still blames me and blames Alito. So, I mean, you can't you got to get past that. Yeah. You got to realize what you did.
Dang, that is crazy. What advice would you give to people that think they might be getting scammed, or there might be somebody in their community? Do you think it's just a research and do your homework, or should they be reporting these people?
In this day and age, it's so easy to put up a GoFundMe or ask for the help. And some people need it. People usually that are asking really, really need it, right? So I think we just have to keep an eye out for things that don't seem right. If they're going, and I don't want to categorize this with everyone, but a lot of times they're going alone to therapy, or there's no family around, and not because they don't have family, it's because they're choosing not to have people go with them, or they do, and some people are stoic and don't want the help. And I understand that, but like, there are some red flags, at least, like, oh, let me just look a little closer, right, before I give money or before. But yeah, and if there's definitely people I've been contacted about, and when I look at it, I see the flags, and some, maybe locally they'll go and they'll talk to a local authority, because it's too easy, and especially now with AI and with social media and with the internet and TikTok, is like, it's not a hard thing to do,
right?
It's people from all around the world. If she had that access now with like TikTok,
yes. Oh my God, can you imagine the damage she would have done?
Oh, the amount of money she would have brought in would have been, because she's super likable.
Mm-hmm. So that kind of leads me to one of my last questions. How does the Hulu documentary build on the story that's already in the podcast? Obviously, there's going to be visual elements, and I think that's
I think that's the big thing.
Yeah,
I think being able to see her with, holding up the syringes and, bald and wearing, the cancer beanie that says cancer. She's got all the gadgets and things. She's walking around with oxygen tanks, and yeah. I mean, I think that alone, being able to now see what others were seeing, because it's really easy to say, oh, I would never have fallen for that. I would have picked up on that. But when you see the extensive portfolio of photographs, and she was a spokesperson from Lymphoma Society. She was out doing public speaking.
I heard the words, "You have stage 3 blood cancer."
She was attending events, very proud about that. She was out there as a survivor attending these fundraisers and raising money. So there's a lot of visuals that you're going to say, wow, like, of course, why would someone think someone faking cancer?
Oh,
so yeah, I'm excited for people to also put the faces to the voices they heard, and then to actually see what she was capable.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it.
Well, I know what I'm doing tomorrow night. Who doesn't love a good true crime doc? I mean, that is why you are listening to this podcast, right?
So before you go, we've got a segment called Live, Laugh, Lie. So the first question is, if you could live this part of your life over again, would you do anything differently in the investigation?
Just the Amanda part?
Yeah. Or anything. Do anything in the
No, I don't think I would do anything differently. I'm proud of the work I did. I'm glad I stuck it out.
Yeah.
It was important to me to come through for Alita and Jessa, because really the whole faking cancer thing, that was one, obviously the part that everyone resonates with, but what was done to Alita and Jessa was, to me, so much worse.
Biggest crime. Maybe.
Yeah. And I needed to see it through for them.
That's awesome. Yeah. Okay. Is there anything that makes you laugh when you look back on this story?
Oh, not so much. Yeah. I mean, once we got the relationship that I've formed with Alita, and other victim Lisa and Lisa's husband Steve, and I mean, there's so many of them, that there's this bond, and that we've been through so much, because it was a real roller coaster for them. So we laugh about a lot of it, because we would look back at pictures and go, oh my God, like, this is even worse than I remember, the race was, and that's something I think in the documentary they did a really great job. The producer that was in charge of doing a lot of the recrees, where the people are talking about the events that took place, the swimming underwater, or the party where Lori told everyone she was dying. Like, we have all photos of all this stuff. So the photos were brought to life really, really well. I like that it feels way more real when you see all this.
Yes. Oh gosh.
We look back at a lot of that. We laugh about, it was traumatic then to them, but now I'm glad they can laugh about it. And we have a little group chat going all the time, a bunch of us that just, it helps. I think it helps them.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like we have to share the story about the swimming underwater because that made me laugh just now. You might be able to tell it better, but basically she stepped to a pool with like a little Band-Aid behind her ear.
Yeah. She had asked them to watch Jessa or pick her up after school and to come over and spend time, and that she was getting a biopsy on her brain. And so they were like, well, what do you mean is it the same day? Oh, yeah. I'll be able to come pick her up. And she showed up, and it was one of those little round Band-Aids. At that time, Lisa was just like, that's weird. Yeah. That doesn't make sense. But there was a lot of stories, like another one left of them. She tripped to the just swam underwater, like nothing. Like what? Like nothing happened. It has lots of sorry. Like we get into it, but I think we talk about it briefly. You mentioned it in the podcast, but I don't even think the documentary, because it keeps coming up when I talk to like past friends, some family members. For whatever reason, Amanda loved telling everybody that she grew up and went to acting and stuff with Lindsay Lohan. And and over time, it kept coming up. And I spoke with somebody fairly recently that said, oh, yeah, she had Lindsay call my daughter for her birthday. And from what I'm finding out, it sounds like she did this a lot because Alita's sister said the same thing. She goes, oh, my God, Nancy, I forgot to tell you about that. And so I think Amanda was calling everyone as Lindsay Lohan. So these are things I look back and laugh like, wow, okay, didn't see that coming. Wait, but I've heard it now through all different friend groups and all different people.
That's hysterical.
Yeah, that was an odd fixation. I was just like, wow, that's an odd one.
Odd. Honestly, we need to get Lindsay Lohan's take on this. I'm like, Lindsay, were you friends with Amanda? Like,
Amanda grew up in Southern California, in Riverside, and Lindsay was in New York. So there's no
correlation.
No.
Wild. Okay, well, we have one more wild question for you. It's the one we asked everybody at the very end. It's, what's the worst lie you've ever told?
Oh. Wow, I'm a pretty straight shooter.
That's good. I accept that answer.
You do?
I'm always proud when people say, like,
I'm going to hold other people accountable all the time. Yeah. I have to kind of watch myself, I think.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And thank you for giving us just the coolest inside scoop. I'm so excited to watch the documentary. Where can people keep up with you and where can they watch the documentary?
Oh, the documentary's on ABC Studio. So ABC Thursday nights. And then it follows on Hulu after each episode. I run a news show now called True Crime News. I'm the managing editor, but that's like a daily show that's out there. But cool, that's it. And otherwise, I kind of just work and keep a low profile.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
This podcast has been brought to you by Podcast Nation.